This is Chapter 6, 20th Century Monsters. On the very day of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first inauguration, the day he told America that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, something fearful was happening in Germany. It would change the fate of the world. The Reichstag, Germany's Congress, was deciding to give absolute government power to the German Chancellor Adolf Hitler. Imagine a country letting its meanest, worst people take charge. Imagine giving those kinds of people the power of life and death over the whole nation. Imagine a nation where children are taught to be tattletales and tell the secret police about anyone who protests, even their parents. Imagine a nation that burns the books of its greatest writers because it fears and hates ideas and truth. Imagine a nation that kills people because it doesn't like their religion or their ideas or because they are handicapped. That's what happened in Germany in the 1930s. Germany no longer even attempted to be a democracy. It will willingly become a dictatorship, the most evil dictatorship recorded in history. Although the dictatorship in Soviet Russia was almost as bad, the Germans used their intelligence and skill to create factories of death. They allowed their government to do unspeakable deeds. Some Germans did not approve, but few spoke out. To do so meant risking lives. But in March 1933, most people in America paid no attention to what was happening in Germany. The Depression seemed more important. Adolf Hitler, he was a little man with a black brush mustache and a dark straight hair that fell into his face. He strutted about, raising his arm in a straight salute and shrieking his speeches. He didn't seem evil, he seemed silly. The German people didn't find him silly. They were still angry about the war they had lost. Their leaders and historians had misled them about the causes of the Great War. They had been told that Germany was no more to blame for the start of the First World War than any other nation. That wasn't true, but the Germans believed it. They thought the rest of the world had picked on them. They thought the Versailles Treaty, the treaty that had ended the Great War, was unfair. They were humiliated by the terms of peace. Germany was not allowed to have a large army, navy, or air force. Germany was to make large cash payments called reparations to the winners to help pay back the costs of the war. Germany was made to say that they were totally to blame for the war. Since most Germans thought they were no more to blame for the war than others, they were furious, especially about those payments. As it turned out, we lent Germany much more than they had ever paid. But most German citizens didn't know that. German citizens were angry and unhappy. Their country was in awful shape economically. Soon after the war, Germany suffered a time of incredible inflation. The government began printing lots of money, partly to pay those reparations, and printing presses ran day and night. When you print a lot of currency, soon none of it's worth much. Prices in Germany rose beyond belief. In 1923, a Hershey chocolate bar cost 150,000 German marks in the United States. The same chocolate bar cost a nickel. German money was almost worthless. Buying a loaf of bread might take a bucket full of bills. People lost all their savings. They had used up everything they had just to pay their rent. Then after they had finally got the inflation under control, the Great Depression set in worldwide. Unemployment became a big problem. What the German people wanted was a leader, someone who could lead them out of the economic mess, someone who could make them feel good about themselves. And during the Depression era, people in other countries were looking for strong leaders too. The Americans chose Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The Germans turned to Hitler. They made a big mistake. That mistake would cost them and the rest of the world grief beyond imagining. Their leader was an evil genius who captured his countrymen and women in a web of words and convinced them he could solve all their problems. Told them that the others were to blame for Germany's troubles. He told them that Germany was greater than any other nation and meant to rule the world. He told them that the other peoples should be their slaves. He told them they must love their fatherland, Germany, before all else. He told them they must not worry about right and wrong because anything Germany did would be right. He told them that might makes right, and most believed him. Hitler wasn't the only one who preached the gospel of nationalism, that loving your nation was more important than loving truth and right actions. Militant nationalism was a 20th century disease. In Japan, a military dictatorship took control of the nation and began stomping on its neighbors. The Japanese, too, were suffering from economic depression. They thought they needed more room for their growing population. They began by attacking China with ferocity that is still hard to believe. In a massive campaign of terror, millions of civilians were tortured and killed, just as in Germany. The Japanese rulers told people that they were a superior race and destined to rule others. In Spain, a strong man named Francisco Franco muscled his way to power, although many Spaniards and other Europeans, and some Americans too, fought against him. In Italy, a pompous dictator named Benito Mussolini took control of the government. Mussolini was a bully, and like all bullies, he picked on those who were weak. He sent Italian forces to Ethiopia, and there, Italian tanks, machine guns, and airplanes attacked brave Ethiopians who fought back with spears and lances. Russia's dictator Joseph Stalin killed millions of his own people, anyone who believed he might threaten his rule. His kind of government, he said, would soon conquer the world. Mussolini called his political movement fascism. Hitler named his Nazism, or National Socialism. In Russia, the forces of evil took charge in the name of communism. These were all totalitarian forms of government. They were the opposite of democracy. In a totalitarian state, individual people don't matter. Only the state is important. Why did good people listen to these terrible leaders? Why did some modern nations become gangster nations? Those are questions that are hard to answer. It didn't happen here. It didn't happen in England. We're just lucky. Were we just lucky, or did our democratic tradition give us the strength to resist the evil thinkers? The Depression brought us grave problems to the people of the United States. In 1933, hogs were selling for only 2.5 cents a pound in the Midwest. One farmer had to sell all his hogs to pay his rent for the month. Another farmer sold a wagon load of oats to buy a pair of shoes. Hunger and malnutrition were a serious problem in the 30s. Many Americans were angry and desperate. It is not surprising that some of them too listened to horrid voices. They needed to blame someone for their problems, so they paid attention to the Ku Klux Klan, to the German American Bund, which was inspired by the Nazis, German American Bund, to a radio preacher, Father Coughlin, who spewed out a message of hate to others. A few Americans no longer believed that all men are created equal. A few wanted to throw out the Bill of Rights, but most Americans rejected the philosophies of wickedness. Why did we escape the 20th century virus of totalitarianism? Was it a New Deal leadership? Was it our tradition of liberty and democracy? What do you think? Could it happen here?